"Mom, I remember your perfume." The boy, 8 years old, stood in the middle of the courtroom, pointing directly at the judge holding the gavel. "I remember your lullabies and the little scar on your finger from cooking." Courtroom 7 went silent. Completely. Judge Rebecca Williams, who had handed down thousands of rulings in family court, dropped her gavel, because the child standing in front of her had just spoken words only a biological son could have known. And the most terrifying part, 15 years ago, she had handed her own child over to an organization that promised to erase all traces, to protect her career. Now, that boy had come back, but not just to find his mother. He came back to bring down an entire network of switching, selling, and programming rootless children. What you're about to hear is the true story of a black judge, a boy who refused to forget, and a legal system rotting from the inside out. If you're a father, a mother, or simply someone who believes in justice, you need to hear this entire story, because sometimes, to protect your child, you have to stand up against the whole world. Courtroom 7. A morning like any other at the Detroit family court. The air was solemn. Polished wood gleamed under the lights. Gavels struck sharp and fast. Eyes tense, locked on the power to decide the fate of a child. In the front row, an 8-year-old black boy sat between two temporary guardians, tiny hands clasped tight, his outfit freshly pressed, carefully chosen for this hearing. No one in that room knew that in just a few seconds, this child would shake the very walls of power. The social worker finished speaking, and Elijah stood up, not out of fear, not out of defiance. He stepped into the center of the courtroom, slow, deliberate, as if he had been waiting for this moment his whole life. Then he raised his hand, pointed straight at the judge's bench. "You're my mother. I remember your perfume. I remember your lullabies. I remember these eyes." The whispers vanished. The entire room stopped breathing. Judge Rebecca Williams dropped her gavel. The wood clattered against the bench with a sharp metallic ring. Her face, once carved from stone after 2 decades of cold, calculated rulings, turned pale, as if she had just seen a ghost. Because the boy wasn't making things up. He was calling back a memory she had buried for more than 15 years. What was supposed to be a routine hearing just became the starting point of a journey to uncover one of the darkest secrets in the American legal system. Rebecca Williams, 52 years old. In Detroit, her name was synonymous with justice. For 22 years on the family court bench, she was known as the Iron Lady of Justice. The first black woman to rise to the top of the system without favors, without alliances, without shortcuts. She once skipped her own victory party to stay late reading a child custody file. She once threatened to cancel an entire court proceeding after catching a lawyer abusing their power. To her, justice had no color, and no one stood above the law. But this morning, for the first time in 2 decades, her hand trembled. The way the boy, Elijah, looked at her. She couldn't breathe. It wasn't fear. It was memory, a memory that had never been spoken aloud. Daniel. That name was once her flesh and blood, once whispered into the ear of a newborn just 2 hours before they came to take him away. That chapter had been buried, hidden beneath hardened verdicts, beneath the black robe of power, beneath a spotless legacy. But now, in the eyes of a child, she saw them again. Daniel's eyes. And for the first time, Detroit's most powerful judge felt the truth rise beyond her control. Not from the law books, but from her own heart. Elijah Washington, 8 years old, small frame, a face hardened beyond his years. He entered the foster system at just 3. Since then, he'd been passed around like a ball no one could hold on to. 9 different foster homes in 8 years, and every single one gave him back. The reason was always the same. He's just too strange. Strange, because he never cried when he was moved. Strange, because he spoke like someone who had lived 2 lifetimes. Elijah knew terms like temporary guardianship, no contact order, and final ruling. He knew to stand when someone said, "All rise." And he once drew the layout of a courtroom, down to the exact position of water glasses, tissue boxes, and the color of flowers on the judge's bench. His guardians thought it was some kind of mental disorder, but the drawings were so precise, it couldn't be coincidence. One time, during a therapy session, Elijah quietly sang a lullaby. His voice distant, dreamlike, half memory, half mist. "Mockingbird don't cry, Mama's near the sky." He said, "My mom used to sing that to me, in a room that smelled like lavender and had white light." What happened that morning in courtroom 7, when he pointed straight at a judge and said, "Mom," made everyone stop, made everyone question. Maybe Elijah wasn't imagining things. Maybe he was remembering something the entire system had spent 8 years trying to bury. 15 years ago, Rebecca Williams wasn't Judge Williams. Back then, she was just a promising young black attorney, new to Detroit's justice system, surrounded by skeptical stares and crushing expectations. The Williams family was a symbol. Her grandfather, Michigan's first black judge, her father, a federal prosecutor, and Rebecca, she was the new hope. But in the shadows of late-night board meetings, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. No husband, no plan, no explanation. When her mother found out, she said just one cold sentence: "There's no such thing as a single black mother on the bench. You choose. The seat or the child. You don't get both." They arranged a meeting with Sterling Family Services, an organization that quietly handled cases like this. Sterling promised, no records, no contact, no trail. The baby would be placed with a decent family, and you go on with your career. Rebecca believed them, or rather she had no choice but to believe. On the day of birth, in Tufts Hospital, she was allowed just 2 hours with her son. In those fleeting moments, she named him Daniel, sang him an old lullaby from her childhood, and whispered, her voice cracking, that someday, if she could, she'd come back for him. Then the door opened, 2 men walked in, and Daniel disappeared from her life, as if he had never existed. That very night, after locking her office door, Rebecca Williams didn't sleep. Instead, she picked up the phone and called the one person she trusted when things went beyond the reach of the law. David Knox, former FBI agent, now a private investigator who handled the kind of cases that never made it onto paper. "David, I need you to look into a boy named Elijah Washington, 8 years old, currently in the foster system. I need everything: birth certificate, adoption history, even who first placed him in the system. And David, I need it tonight." David didn't ask why. He just said one thing: "If this is personal, then it's not just an investigation anymore." By 4 a.m., Rebecca's phone rang. David's voice was low, cold. "Rebecca, Elijah has no adoption record. The birth certificate is fake. The listed parents, Jennifer and Marcus Washington, died in 2016, and the accident report clearly states they had no children." A chill shot down Rebecca's spine, but David wasn't finished. Worse, the organization that handled the Daniel case back then, Sterling Family Services, had its license revoked in 2018. Charges: child trafficking, forged documents, and placing kids in the system under false identities. Rebecca clutched the phone, her hand trembling. Daniel, might be Elijah, and Elijah might have been sold. While Rebecca was quietly piecing together the fractured remnants of truth, an unexpected figure stepped into the orbit of the unraveling. Kendra Lewis, a young, brown-skinned attorney, usually assigned as a translator in cases involving African and Latinx children within the Detroit court system. That night, in the quiet stillness of the courthouse parking lot, Kendra gently knocked on the window of Rebecca's car. "I'm sorry, Judge Williams, but I was present at Elijah's hearing this morning, and I'm certain I've seen that boy before." Rebecca frowned slightly. Kendra lowered her voice, her eyes trembling. "Not in person, but in photographs, during a closed-door meeting 7 years ago, back when I was interning at a private law firm. They hosted these so-called newborn selection events for well-off families, which were, in truth, legalized child auctions, and Sterling was the main coordinator." Rebecca froze. Kendra continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I stayed silent for 7 years, because I was scared, because I was just a brown intern in a room full of white power. But today, when that boy stood in open court and pointed and said, 'Mom,' I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." She lifted her head, looking Rebecca in the eye for the first time. "If you're going after Sterling, I want in, and I don't care if it costs me my career." Rebecca looked at the young woman standing before her, and she knew. This fight was no longer hers alone. 9 p.m. A light rain fell over Detroit. Rebecca Williams pulled up in front of a transitional home, the place where Patricia Monroe had taken Elijah in after the shock of the courtroom. Standing at the doorstep, Rebecca's heart pounded like a war drum. The door opened. Patricia, a black woman in her early 60s, small in frame but steady in presence, nodded gently. "He's been waiting for you since before the sun went down." Elijah appeared in the doorway like a flicker. He ran into Rebecca's arms, gripping her like he'd never let go again. "Mom, I knew you'd come for me." Rebecca held him tight, unable to speak, but what brought tears to her eyes wasn't just his embrace. It was what Elijah said next. "You still drive the car with the dent on the left side, right? You still drink hazelnut coffee on Sunday mornings. Read the paper at that tiny shop on the corner. You used to carry me through the park with the tulips, and you said, 'Flowers grow through hard soil. That means you will grow strong, too.'" Rebecca broke down. The memories she had buried for 15 years. Elijah still remembered. But then, beneath the emotion, a shadow crept in. How could a 3-month-old child remember any of that? Or worse, what if someone had made sure Elijah remembered? And what if they had done it, not out of love, but for reasons far less innocent? The next morning, Rebecca got a call from David Knox. His voice was heavy, like lead. "Rebecca, Elijah isn't the only one. I found a list of 43 other children. They all have the same pattern. Handled by Sterling Family Services. Registered under falsified records. Disappeared from the system after 2 to 3 years." Rebecca froze in place. Knox continued, his tone dropping lower. "And there's one name you need to hear. Sarah Phillips, the only daughter of Judge Harrison Phillips. Reported missing 8 years ago after a so-called accidental handoff to the wrong adoptive family. Case was closed. No trace left behind." That name hit like lightning in broad daylight. Phillips, the conservative colleague who often clashed with Rebecca in court, had been a victim too. Rebecca asked sharply, "Is Sterling just a front for something bigger?" Knox exhaled. "No doubt. I traced the money trail. It runs through 5 law firms, 3 private organizations, 1 charity foundation, and even a unit inside Child Protective Services. This isn't a black market operation. It's an organized network disguised under the mission of rescuing at-risk children. Rebecca gripped the steering wheel, closed her eyes for a moment. If Elijah was just the first piece, then what lay behind him was a full-blown map of hell no one had ever dared to draw. 2 a.m., Rebecca's phone rang, sharp, relentless. On the other end, Patricia's voice, trembling, barely audible. "Rebecca, they took Elijah. 2 men, in black suits, fake badges. They said, if you keep digging, he'll disappear forever." Rebecca shot out of bed like she'd been electrocuted. 10 minutes later, she was at Patricia's house. Police cars surrounding the scene. The front door kicked in. Shattered glass scattered across the lawn. Patricia lay on a stretcher, her left arm broken, blood soaking through her nightgown. I tried to protect him, but they had a key. They weren't robbers. They knew every corner of this house. Rebecca felt something in her chest cave in, like gravity had doubled. As she walked back to her car, she spotted an envelope taped to the windshield. Inside, a single handwritten line, scrawled in crude lettering. "Keep digging into the past. Next time, you won't even find the body." No name, no fingerprints, just the scent of cold threat, and a message as clear as death itself. You're poking at the system, and the price is your son. For the first time in 22 years on the bench, Rebecca realized justice no longer lived inside the courtroom. It now stood trembling, on the edge between blood and truth. The next morning, Rebecca walked into the county police department, her eyes sharp as blades. Across from her sat Chief Murphy, his usual weary posture, coffee cup in hand. "Elijah's case is being classified as a runaway. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses. Ms. Patricia fell down the stairs. No suspect involved." Rebecca swallowed her fury, then laid the evidence on his desk. Photos of Patricia's broken arm, the ransacked house, and a copy of the handwritten death threat. "This is what you call falling down the stairs? How many fake reports do you plan to write to cover for a very real system?" Murphy shrugged. "Foster kids run all the time. Don't let personal feelings cloud your judgment, Judge Williams." Rebecca walked out, but not to retreat. She called Kendra Louie, the young attorney who'd once seen Sterling's face at those secret auction events. "I need you to do something illegal and dangerous." Kendra didn't flinch. 3 hours later, she sent encrypted deep search data through a secure bank channel. The findings. Murphy's secondary account had received $280,000 from a child welfare foundation, a Sterling front. His email logs showed he had personally shut down at least 12 investigations involving suspicious adoption records. Worse, Kendra uncovered that Sterling was running an internal surveillance network. Court clerks, social workers, even a handful of judges were either bought off or blackmailed. "You're in the middle of a war, and in this war, the law has no voice anymore." Late at night, David Knox called Rebecca, his voice shaken in a way she had never heard before. "I just tracked a signal, an old GPS tag embedded in one of the child transport vans. Elijah, he's been taken to a place called Riverside Youth Center. It's about 40 miles outside Detroit." Rebecca froze. The name sounded like a wellness facility. But then Knox added, "The name is a front. It's actually a facility used to reprogram rootless children. They erase memories, teach obedience, turn kids into living tools." But the real shock came from Kendra. She had just decrypted a confidential file from Sterling's internal system. "Rebecca, I found a list of special monitors, and one of the names is Sarah Phillips. Judge Harrison Phillips's daughter, Sarah, the girl reported missing 8 years ago. was never truly missing. Sterling had kept her, retrained her, then turned her into an enforcer to suppress other children. The girl who had once been a victim was now the keeper of the gates to hell. Rebecca could barely breathe. They don't just abduct children, they rewire their souls. They twist love into control. And now, my colleague's daughter is the one standing between Elijah and freedom. Inside the darkness of Riverside Youth Center, justice didn't come from courtrooms. It came from those brave enough to walk into the fire, to reclaim what should never have been stolen: identity and love. Midnight. An old truck idled at the edge of the woods surrounding Riverside Youth Center, a place that looked, from the outside, like an upscale wellness retreat. But inside, it was a memory erasure facility for children. Inside the truck were 4 people: Rebecca, Knox, Kendra, and Judge Phillips. None of them were criminals. But tonight, they chose to break the law to rescue the children the law had abandoned. Knox cut the perimeter power. Kendra slipped into the administrative wing, following a stolen blueprint. Rebecca and Phillips moved toward the basement, following the faint echoes rising from below. And then, they saw it. Not beds, not rooms, cages, steel cages, 62 children, hair tangled, eyes hollow. A 7-year-old girl who couldn't remember her name. A 10-year-old boy who repeated one phrase over and over: "I don't have a mom. I was born at the facility." Rebecca reached out, her hand brushing the bars. It felt like her heart was being torn apart. Beside her, Judge Phillips dropped to his knees, staring at his daughter, Sarah. Once full of life, now just a shell, standing guard for the very system that had reprogrammed her. Kendra activated a hidden live stream through the center's shadow Wi-Fi network. "This is the truth," she whispered into the lens. "This is how children are erased, to serve hidden agendas." In under 2 hours, 3 million views. Comments flooded in. "Save the kids now. This is a disguised prison. We can't stay silent any longer." A tidal wave of justice, sparked by one phone, and 4 people brave enough to do what was right, even if the whole system came after them. Footsteps echoed down the cold concrete hallway. Robert Sterling, the founder of Sterling Family Services, emerged into the basement of Riverside, ebony cane in hand, walking slow and deliberate, like he was entering a boardroom, not a crime scene. Behind him, a team of private security in black tactical gear, armed like a special ops unit. Facing him stood Rebecca, thin, steady, her eyes burning with fire. Beside her, Knox, Kendra, and Judge Phillips, trying to calm the children from breaking into panic. Sterling gave a thin smile. "Judge Williams, you've taken this too far, but I'm a man who knows when to offer an exit. Here's the deal. You turn off the live stream. I guarantee safety for you, your son, and everyone with you. All records disappear." Rebecca stepped forward, one breath away from Sterling. The live stream camera caught everything, the eerie blue light of the phone, casting his face in raw detail. Every wrinkle, every ounce of fury, laid bare. "You sell children. You deceive justice. But you can't silence the truth." Her voice cracked through the air, like a gavel striking hard oak. "I want the world to see your face, not in a court file, but in the full light of truth. Tonight, you won't shut down the live stream, and tomorrow, you won't shut down a nation that's waking up." Silence. Sterling took a step back, and from behind him, the sound of FBI sirens cut through the night, slow, but certain. Justice was finally on the move. The federal courtroom was packed to the walls. At the bench, Judge Morrison held a stern expression. Below, prosecutors, attorneys, journalists, and dozens of victims once labeled as missing files. But the center of the entire trial was an 8-year-old boy, sitting silently in the witness slacks, white button-down shirt, neatly combed hair, lifted his eyes toward Robert Sterling, who sat with his head bowed. His voice didn't tremble. He spoke slowly, as if he'd waited his whole life to say these words. They locked me in the basement. They hit me every time I talked about my mom. They made me write over and over, "My mother is dead." But I still remember her scent, and I know she never left me. The room held its breath. When Elijah finished, Kendra Louie stepped forward. She presented financial records, $300,000 wired to Robert Sterling's account. From one person, Rebecca's own mother. Memo line, full erasure, no record. Outrage erupted. Headlines exploded across media outlets, from forgotten child to truth teller. Elijah exposes nationwide child trafficking ring. Sterling sentenced to 3 life terms, over 200 officials under investigation. Elijah left the courtroom in Rebecca's arms, not with a verdict, but with the truth now unburied. And in doing so, this child, once denied a name, a mother, and a voice, did the one thing the entire system tried to silence. He spoke for every child who'd been forgotten, but never stopped hoping to be found. 6 months after the historic trial, Rebecca Williams stepped out of the courthouse. No longer a judge. She had resigned willingly, not out of disgrace, but because real justice, she realized, didn't sit in the high chair. It lived in the heart of those who never stopped fighting for it. With an honor settlement and grassroots funding, Rebecca founded the Daniel Foundation, named after the whisper she once gave her newborn son in a hospital room long ago. The foundation is dedicated to locating and reuniting missing children with their true families, offering legal advocacy and psychological support. Elijah, now living with his mother in a small Detroit apartment, is enrolled in a gifted program designed for trauma-impacted youth. Every morning, he places a hand on his mother's shoulder and says with quiet conviction, "Mom, I want to be a lawyer too. I want to help other kids, like you helped me." Rebecca pulls him into her arms, tears falling. Not from pain, but from the bloom of a future just beginning. Kendra Lewis, Judge Phillips, and Patricia Monroe, Elijah's former foster guardian, all joined the foundation's efforts. Together they built a new network, a justice system not built to serve power, but to protect the voiceless. Not every wound has healed, but in the small garden behind their home, Elijah and his mother plant 1 flower each month for every child who's been found. And each flower is a vow. We will never let the forgotten be forgotten again. I used to think justice was a verdict, a gavel hitting wood, bringing an argument to an end. But after telling this story, I see it differently now. Justice is an 8-year-old boy, lied to, locked away, taught to forget. And still, he stood up and said, "I remember my mother." Elijah had no superpowers. All he had was a memory and an unshakable belief that real love cannot be erased, no matter how many hands try to wipe it away. And Rebecca, she wasn't perfect. She had stayed silent. She had compromised. She had chosen safety over what was right. But when it came down to the final choice, she didn't save her reputation. She saved her son, and every child society wanted to forget. You know what? The world doesn't change because of the most powerful people. It changes because of the ones who love someone so deeply, they can't look away from injustice. And if you've ever wondered whether one person can make a difference, just remember Elijah and a sentence that lasted only 3 words. I remember Mom.